Today, it is my great privilege to introduce as our guest Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty, a distinguished career military officer, an historian, an author, an expert on the international railroad industry. Some of you may be familiar with Colonel Prouty from his 1970s book, The Secret Team, which has now recently been republished and is once again available. And of course, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people in the United States and around the world are familiar with Colonel Prouty as the real live character upon whom the figure of Mr. X in the recent Oliver Stone movie JFK was based. Colonel Prouty has recently published a new book called JFK, the CIA, Vietnam, and the Plot to Kill John Kennedy. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Colonel Prouty here to the show today. I thought that it would be sensible, rather than giving a long sort of a curriculum vitae introduction, to ask you to start off by telling our audience a little bit about yourself, your career, because it is so extraordinary and is such an important backdrop to the discussion that we're going to have about the book today.
You know, Jeff, I came on duty actually as an Army cavalryman. I've ridden horses as far as 600 miles, you know, day after day. Started with that, went into tanks, so I was on duty before Pearl Harbor. And after that, I went through flying school, and I was based in Cairo. And one day I was asked to pick up a team of people that were going on a trip, and they were a geological survey team going into Saudi Arabia to look at the oil fields there during the war. And then we came back and we found out that Roosevelt, Churchill, and Chiang Kai-shek were having a conference in Cairo, the Cairo Conference of World War II, and that the geological survey people made a report to Roosevelt, who ordered immediately a 50,000 barrel a day refinery to be built in Saudi Arabia. And that started that big Saudi Arabian oil boom that we've seen since then. So when you take part in something like that early in your career, you're kind of interested in the way things develop. And a morning or two later, after the Cairo conference ended, I was told to get my plane ready. Went out to the plane, and they brought Chinese delegation out there, and we flew to Tehran. I didn't know what was going to happen in Tehran, but I had just been ordered to fly there. En route, I stopped at Habanir in Iraq, and a plane came in with an old friend of mine flying it, and Elliott Roosevelt. So I introduced Elliott Roosevelt to the Chinese. But do you know, to this day, you cannot find in a history book that the Chinese were at the Tehran conference with Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill. I know one book printed by the U.S. government that corroborates that. Of course, I have pictures, and my co-pilot and my crew were there. But part of the Tehran conference business was to make plans for the Far East after World War II. So you begin to think about how these things happen when they come up like that. And I was in Japan at the end of the war. We were bringing the POWs out as soon as we could. And I went back to Okinawa, where we were based, and they were loading ships with this enormous stockpile of equipment that was to be used to support the invasion of Japan, 500,000 men, and we didn't need it. So I was talking with the harbor master in Naha, and I said, what are you going to do, run that all back to the States? He said, hell no. He said, half of this is going up to Seoul, Korea. And he said, the other half we're sending down to Hanoi. Half of what we were going to use to go into Japan went to Korea, and half went to Hanoi. This was September 2nd of 1945, and those plans were in being at that time. Now, who made those plans? Truman had been president for only a few months. I doubt that he did, but you know, who made the plans for that? Because a little later came the Korean War, and they used the weapons we sent there. Came the war in Vietnam, and Ho Chi Minh was using the weapons we gave him. He used them against the French. That's why he was able to surprise the French with first-class artillery pieces that they didn't think he had. Then we reversed the field, and we began to back the French to the extent that we spent $2 to $3 billion supporting the French against Ho Chi Minh. In 1954, they were defeated at Dien Bien Phu. Ho Chi Minh inherited all of the arms they lost, and then from 54 until 65, we were involved in Vietnam, but under the operational control of the CIA, not a military operation. And this gets very important when you see things like that happen because, well, just think of one problem that's in the papers all the time, the POWs and the MIAs. You don't have POWs when you don't have an army there. Just because somebody's working for CIA doesn't give them the status of a POW, and so on. All these things get confused in a historical story that doesn't really make sense. The first military people who went into Vietnam were the Marines at Da Nang in March of 1965. And yet, as John Foster Dulles had made a speech himself, we had been in Vietnam since 1945, 20 years in the preparation, you might say, for this war. And then why do I use the word preparation? Because some of the things that were done, like this arms movement and setting up the units in Vietnam before we ever had military people there, took 20 years to do that.
You made a point, by the way, I should just interrupt here because I think it's very important because people may be somewhat misled by the title of the book, which talks about the JFK assassination. I think it's essential to tell people that this is truly an extraordinary history of the entire period of what's been called the Cold War, building up to the Kennedy assassination and beyond. And the question you yourself just posed, who made those decisions? In the very beginning chapter of the book, you use a term that I think was originally coined by Buckminster Fuller, the international power elite. And you talked in what to me was very impressive terms about some of these behind-the-scenes decision makers. You talked about the propaganda schemes that sort of define their world outlook. And I think, you know, maybe it would be worthwhile as we get into this real history of the Cold War to perhaps start out by just telling people a little bit about this international power elite and these propaganda schemes and how some of this thing works.
Well, you know, it's very common for people to respond when you try to speak that way, saying, oh, well, here's somebody that just believes in conspiratorial theories or is a little bit paranoid. But now we ought to stop and think carefully what we're talking about. All of history has been controlled by powerful figures. Disraeli in the 19th century said, for those people who are not aware of it, if they realize what goes on behind government, they wouldn't believe it. Sun Tzu, the Chinese emperor, said the same thing back in his period. Buckminster Fuller goes back 2,000 years talking about the elite. And in this country today, we recognize the power behind, let's say, lobbyists who are, in a sense, above the government in that they pay special money to the president to get him reelected. They pay special money to senators and congressmen to get them reelected, but to influence legislation in their favor. And there is and has been throughout history an elite that runs countries and the world. What is this one world all about? And if we don't recognize that, it's very difficult to understand the situation we're in.
You make a point several times in the book about the outlook of a British East India Company economist named Thomas Malthus, and you relate his worldview to this power elite and specifically to the kinds of things that went on during the peak of the Vietnam War in the 60s.
You see, by that time in history, the British Empire had been built on the control of the sea. They were able to drive ships around the world. They knew the world was a sphere. Flat world had gone out. But knowing that the world is a sphere is a very important thing for mankind. It means its surface is finite. And if it's finite, then there's not more space over there and more there. It's just so much. So they began immediately to inventory Earth. And this was one of the jobs of the East India companies. And Thomas Malthus, who taught at Haileybury College, which was the East India College, was the director of economics there. And it was his job. He was the first person ever assigned to the job of inventorying the Earth. Where does tin come from? Where does iron come from? And so on. And in the process, they began to find out how many different people there were in the world, how many different types of people, how many races of people, and where everything was, begin to map the world. Well, that's a very important function, but it leads you to one more thing that has governed relationship between countries ever since then, because Malthus came up with this idea that the population is growing ever so much faster than the ability to raise food, and therefore it wouldn't be long before mankind would run out of food and there would be a terrible loss of life. And it was very convenient that Darwin came along, working for the same employer, the East India Company, with the idea that, well, life is a race for the survival of the fittest anyway, and so the fittest survive. Now, those two theories, which are propaganda, sort of made it legal for the people who invaded, the colonialists, to kill off a couple 100,000 people, because first of all, they probably weren't going to get to eat anyway, and certainly they weren't the fittest, because they're not alive now, they're dead, we're the fittest. It backed up the idea of this proprietary colonialism that swept the world from that period right on up into the 19th century, and in some respects applies today, because look what's going on in Europe. Look what went on in Vietnam, where hundreds of thousands of people were killed. And the feeling was, you know, what they used to call the mere gook idea, that, well, it doesn't matter. They're not going to live anyway. It's a very powerful underpinning to the civilization today.
Well, you mentioned in one of your last talks that petroleum wasn't what we thought it was, that it wasn't a fossil fuel, that it didn't come from fossil animals.
Yeah.
Is it just a mineral? Is it a mineral like any other mineral? Is that how it, what would you say? How did it, what's the origin of
You see,
petroleum?
when they first found petroleum, because they were beginning to make motors and needed on axles or wheels on railroad trains and all that sort of thing, and remember, trains started in the beginning of the 19th century, then oil went from just a lubricant to a fuel, and it made it valuable. And Rockefeller happened to be the smartest man in the business at the time, but he made most of his money, or much of it, off the transport of the petroleum as well as selling it. But one thing they realized was, because oil is putting a price on oil is like putting a price on a pail of water. You know, no initial cost. It's in the ground, and in those days they were, some of it almost what you'd call surface mining the oil. They didn't go down deep. So in order to get the price up, they hit on the idea that they would have to make it appear to be scarce. That after we take the next few barrels out, we're probably going to have to close this well. You know, that kind of thing. But a very fortuitous event. In 1892, there was a convention in Geneva of scientists to determine what organic substances are. Well, the definition of organic is a substance with hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. And so it's usually a living substance, a tree. You analyze a dead tree, hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen, and grass, and so on, living things. Animals, we are hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. So at this Geneva Convention, Rockefeller took advantage of sending some scientists over who said, oil, petroleum, is hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. Therefore, it must be derived from the spoiling, the rotting of formerly living matter. And playing the game properly, when this scientific convention was over, they defined oil as the residue from formerly living matter. Well, that makes it a fossil fuel. I don't know why they decided to use the word fossil, but it says formerly living matter, it's fossil. Well, of course, today, and another thing we should know is that there has never been a fossil, a real fossil, found below 16,000 feet. And you can't argue at 16,000 there's a level line, because someplace the ground sinks and so on. But 16 is what the scientists say, 16,000. We mine oil, or we drill for oil, at 30,000, 33,000, 28,000 every day of the week. So right there we rule it out that it isn't fossil fuel. It's called fossil fuel for the minds of the public to feel that it is an asset that is running out, being depleted. We talk about depletion allowance, which is a lot of you know. And actually, if you know the world's oil supply, you know that it is not going to run out for an awfully long time. It is the second most prevalent liquid on Earth. And we haven't begun to dig. Well, with all that background, you see, the people in charge of the petroleum business, for perfectly reasonable business things, like any other man in the business, wants to keep his price as high as he can get away with. And the way to do is just say, well, there's no more. The last barrel is going to cost $1,000, and then it's all done. And they preach that stuff. What bothers me is that in geology books, it's in there. The geologists say it's a fossil fuel. Somehow they've been bought. I mean, I went to a 4-year federal staff energy seminar run by the government of the United States during the so-called energy crisis. I was the participant that represented the railroad industry. The airline industry was there. Every AA, administrative assistant of senators and congressmen, was there. The CIA was there, the Defense Department was there, the State Department was there. Sometimes sitting right in front of me in the row would be Henry Kissinger with his friend, the head of Department of Defense. That's too bad, I can't put the names with them. But anyway, people like that, top men in the government, sitting there listening to the Federal Staff Energy Seminar. Well, what this was doing is for 4 years, they were teaching a propaganda line to the leading people in this country, and therefore to the leading people in the world, when you include the Schlesingers, Kissinger and Schlesinger, among others. And the object of it was, as Kissinger used in his own terms when it was time for him to speak, to create a world price for oil. In other words, not 30 cents a gallon here and 90 cents a gallon there, but let's get a world price. That's their goal, and they're trying to do that for wheat and everything else. We don't realize what the controls are, whether it's oil or some of these other things. Almost everything today is being categorized at the highest price they can possibly make it go. And so calling petroleum a fossil fuel is the basis for this system with respect to petroleum. And I don't know if the name Arthur Kantrowitz rings any bell. Arthur Kantrowitz is the head of the Kantrowitz Labs set up by the Avco company near Boston, scientific laboratories. And a great man in the scientific world. And Kantrowitz and I were sitting at a table at this seminar once, and the table happened to be all young college grad, PhD geologists. And so just to get a conversation started, I turned to Kantrowitz and I said, Arthur, what do you think about this foolishness of these speakers talking about fossil fuel? And it was kind of put up. He started laughing. He said, you know, that gets me. He says, I don't have a geology degree, but he had 1,000 other degrees. And he said, I don't understand. He said, you'd think that these heads, these other fellows at the table, we did it on purpose, start listening, you know. And he asked, he said, are you gentlemen, he says, you're here at the meeting, are you gentlemen by any chance geologists? And one fellow, yes, I am. And the other one, yeah. He said, well, why don't you tell me? He said, why is oil, you know, and he went on like that. We brought the house down because nobody could argue with Kantrowitz. He like Einstein. People aren't going to, and he told him right there, he said, just drop it. But it's in all the books and in all the papers. But it started from that strange meeting in 1892, a scientific convention. I have a big, thick scientific encyclopedia put out by the Van Oosteren Company that's about, 15 years old now, but it has the whole story of the conference. It doesn't have the Rockefeller part, but it has the whole story of how they straightened out organic chemicals and how it was all figured, and they've got petroleum right in there.
Amazing. Amazing. So
these aren't accidental things, you see. There's a dollar sign behind almost everything.
Little known to the public is the fact that the inventor of the horseless carriage road engine was not Henry Ford, but one George B. Selden. Selden sold his patent from 1895 to the Association of Licensed Automobile Manufacturers, and the companies in the fledgling industry were required to pay only 1% of their yearly earnings to this association. Henry Ford refused to abide by the Selden patent and was quoted as saying that Selden and his patent can go to hell. Rockefeller took an interest in Ford, whose case was lost when the court decided in favor of the Association of Licensed Automobile Manufacturers. Rockefeller came to Ford's defense with plenty of money and legal counsel, and when Ford appealed, the Court of Appeals overturned the previous decision, ruling in favor of Ford. The invention by Nikola Tesla of the AC induction motor around 1900 dealt a serious blow to Rockefeller and Ford's plan for an automobile industry that would rely heavily on crude oil refined into gasoline. This combination of a combustion motor and its need for gasoline could create a fortune for Ford and rescue Rockefeller from the falling price of kerosene due to the advent of electricity. Tesla's invention would create cars running on electricity and topple the giant, and using Ford and Thomas Edison, who tried to prove that AC was a danger, Rockefeller managed to turn the automobile industry towards combustion engines and gasoline. Ford's Model T became a hit, he became extremely wealthy, and Ford became a huge employer of labor in Michigan, a labor force he ruled over in a heavy-handed, authoritarian fashion.
In 1930, Nikola Tesla asked his nephew Peter Savo, who was born in Yugoslavia in 1899, to come to New York. Peter was 43 years younger than his uncle. Up to that date, he had lived under stringent conditions in Yugoslavia, Tesla's country of birth. During the summer of 1931, Tesla took his nephew to Buffalo to unveil and test a new automobile. Tesla had developed it with his own personal funds. It was a Pierce Arrow, one of the luxury cars of the period. The engine had been removed, leaving the clutch, gearbox, and transmission to the rear wheels undisturbed. The gasoline engine had been replaced with a round, completely enclosed electric motor of approximately 1 meter in length and 65 centimeter in diameter, with a cooling fan in front. Reputedly, it has no distributor. Tesla was not willing to say who had manufactured the engine. It was possibly one of the divisions of Westinghouse. The energy receiver, gravitational energy converter, had been built by Tesla himself. The dimensions of the converter housing were approximately 60 times 25 times 15 centimeter. It was installed in front of the dashboard. Among other things, the converter contained 12 vacuum tubes, of which 3 were of the 70L7 type. The heavy antenna, approximately 1.8 meters long, came out of the converter. Furthermore, 2 thick rods protruded approximately 10 centimeters from the converter housing. Tesla pushed them in, saying, "Now we have power." The motor achieved a maximum of 1800 RPM. Tesla said it was fairly hot when operating and therefore a cooling fan was required. For the rest, he said there was enough power in the converter to illuminate an entire house, besides running the car engine. The car was tested for a week, reaching a top speed of 90 miles per hour effortlessly. Its performance data were at least comparable to those of an automobile using gasoline. At a stop sign, a passerby remarked that there were no exhaust gases coming from the exhaust pipe. Peter answered, "We have no motor." The car was kept on a farm perhaps 20 miles outside of Buffalo, not far from Niagara Falls. A few months after this automobile test, and because of the economic crisis at the time, Pierce Arrow had to stop production. It is very likely that the interconnection between the electric motor and the transmission had been performed there. Pierce Arrow's tools were taken over by Studebaker in South Bend. Not quite 30 years later, the company also vanished to form American Motors jointly with Nash. Later, some of its fans attempted to resuscitate the Pierce Arrow. Unfortunately, they were not successful.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it.
I got facts over tracks, isn't that? Spitting slow, spitting fast, I could roast, I could gas. Think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past. And the pettiness, a reflection of the emptiness. Hilarious, you think you're worth my time, you're delirious. Mysterious, because you hide behind a fake exterior. Inferior, you know I'll always be a bit superior. Get off of me, this ain't no humble brag. I want you to hear words, you can say them back. I want you to feel free from the chains at last, and to believe in what you got, it was built to last, yeah. Now that I've been put through hell, I never got anyone's help, I had to do it all myself. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. Gonna learn the consequence of being incompetent. Mental health is confidence, dreams into modestness. I'm not here to save the day, that's for you to take away. I could play a million mind games, but instead I say something not illogical, something that is topical. Rub it on and watch it go, make yourself unstoppable. Dreams are irresponsible, but they're always possible. If you just believe, you could be so remarkable. Thoughts in my head, a collage and they spread. I'll be great one day, going off of my meds. No, I'm not giving up, no, I'm not giving in. I will make it to the top, taking off in the wind. I gotta make it, I'm saving every day to taste it. I'm patient, but my mind, it can hardly take it. I'm chasing a dream that I've had for several ages. A vacant, modern kingdom for the taking. Now that I've been put through hell, I never got anyone's help, I had to do it all myself. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
And to top our news here at 6 o'clock, an age-old dream becoming a reality. A local inventor has discovered a way, hear this, to use water to run your car.
It's a major breakthrough that will no doubt make motorists happy. And as Ralph Robinson explains, the Pentagon is also showing lots of interest in this project.
Water has always been considered a precious commodity, but Stan Meyer's invention may make it even more valuable. He has developed what's called a water fuel cell. It has taken the place of his old gas tank. The water fuel cell breaks down water molecules into oxygen and hydrogen. The hydrogen is used to run his dune buggy.
I don't care if you use rainwater, well water, city water, ocean water. If you don't have any fresh water, go ahead and use snow. If you don't have any snow available to you, then use salt water because there's no adverse effect to the fuel cell.
Meyer started working on this project 4 years ago. He's not a scientist. He isn't even a chemist. In fact, he never graduated from college. Myers was determined, he says, to design something to protect this country from oil embargoes.
And we have calculated that if we take the dune buggy from Los Angeles to New York, we would roughly use 22 gallons of water.
The Pentagon flew a lieutenant colonel in last week to look at Meyer's invention. There's talk of possibly using it in the Star Wars defense program and to run army tanks. Myers is currently perfecting a water fuel cell for cars. It will cost about $1,500. He says it won't need any maintenance, and you won't have to replace it. It'll be at least 2 years before the fuel system goes into mass production. The day it happens will be one the fuel industry hates, but it'll put a smile on the face of those who've had to say at one time or another, fill her up.
A car that runs on water instead of gasoline. Can it be true? Well, inventor Stanley Meyer made an announcement today in Colorado Springs. He says he's come up with a device that will hook up to any engine and allow it to run on good old H2O. News 13's Kurt Goff tonight on the possible impact of the water fuel cell.
Stanley Meyer says the answer to dependence on foreign oil lies all around us. In seawater, tap water, and rainwater. Any kind of H2O, he says, can power just about every type of engine. How? With the water fuel cell. It fits in the palm of his hand, but it could revolutionize the world.
You're talking about a pollution-free, totally new source of energy, the voltage disassociation of water.
The fuel cell converts water into a gas, hydrogen oxygen, which is released in the form of thermo-explosive energy.
So the water fuel injector simply replaces the spark plug. We hook it to a hydrogen computer system which regulates and meters the flow going into the injector. It processes the water in such a way to release its thermal explosive energy.
The man who invented an engine that can run on water says he's been offered $1 billion in cash by oil-producing countries to sell his patent. So far, he hasn't sold. Environmental specialist Jan Porter talked to the inventor, who thinks that the U.S. auto industry could produce cars that run on water now if they wanted to.
Our industrial base of the world is based on the utilization.
Stan Meyer has a car that runs on water, and that's drawing crowds at this year's Extraordinary Science Conference in Colorado Springs. Myers has developed what is called the water fuel cell injector. The injector breaks down the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen, and the hydrogen is what powers the car.
Basically, all we do is replace the spark plug and replace it with the water fuel cell injectors you see right here. We simply feed ordinary non-processed water or processed water in here, and as the water goes into the injector, it hits a very high pulse voltage frequency, which instantly converts it into thermal explosive energy, and as a result we can run this car down the road on water.
Meyer's invention was introduced in Britain earlier this month, and now the Brits have followed him here.
We recently took a scientific delegation to witness Stan's work, to really evaluate it, and came back saying this is one of the most important inventions of the century.
This is no ordinary car. It's a dream come true. A car that runs on a cheap, safe fuel that's in limitless supply.
The car can be run on any form of natural water. You can use rainwater, well water, city water, ocean water, and if you don't have ocean water available, you can go ahead and use snow. Just use any form of natural water. You don't process it in any way. You add no chemicals to it. Just use ordinary rainwater.
The inventor believes he's found a way of generating some form of atomic power from water. And it was this dream of endless energy from water that was first raised 5 years ago this week. And there's one person who firmly believes he's beaten the rest of the world to it. Behind these garage doors in Ohio lies, allegedly, the world's first water-powered car, the creation of amateur inventor Stanley Meyer.
This dune buggy operates around 65 miles per hour on around 60 miles per gallon of water. It's very efficient as opposed to running on gasoline. One time I was offered well over $1 billion in cold cash to buy out the technology, to suppress it. Of course, my interest is to get it into the economies of the world and do it very quickly. We've developed the technology over the years, and we've legalized the technology, and now what we're trying to do is coordinate with industry to design kits that can be fitted to an existing internal combustion engine, whether it's a gasoline engine or even a diesel engine.
His kit is not unlike a cold fusion cell, but with very high voltages applied. Skeptics believe it's no more than a battery storage device, but a New York millionaire is paying to have it all checked out in a secret lab in Boston.
The Pentagon is also showing lots of interest in this project.
In March 20, 1998, inventor Stanley Meyer bolted from a Cracker Barrel restaurant in Grove City, Ohio. Once outside in the parking lot, he slumped over and vomited before declaring, "They poisoned me." Later that day, he died. A local coroner determined that the 57-year-old Meyer perished due to a brain aneurysm, and a 3-month police investigation uncovered no evidence of foul play. Lead Detective Lieutenant Steve Robinette stated, "Meyer's death was laced with all sorts of stories of conspiracy, cloak and dagger stories. The impetus for these whispers of a nefarious plot arose from Meyer's work on H-20 hydrogen-fueled automobile engines. On the day of his death, Meyer was dining with his brother Stephen and 2 Belgian investors who intended to obtain a 56-acre plot of land in Grove City in order to erect a manufacturing facility. Although the members of his community didn't lend much support, often viewing him as a crank, city officials had green-lighted the construction of Meyer's factory 2 months earlier. Stephen Meyer recalls the events of that evening. Stanley took a sip of cranberry juice. Then he grabbed his neck, bolted out the door, dropped to his knees, and vomited violently. I ran outside and asked him, "What's wrong?" Stephen recalled. He said, "They poisoned me." That was his dying declaration. Meyer was no pie-in-the-sky dreamer. Holding a total of 42 patents, he worked on NASA's Gemini project, which sent a man into outer space in the 1960s, as well as an energy system for the Star Wars program, a missile defense system created by the United States military. In a July 8, 2007 article, Dean Narciso of the Columbus Dispatch wrote, "Meyer's work drew worldwide attention, mysterious visitors from overseas, spying, and lucrative buyout offers." Those closest to Meyer recall seeing wealthy Arabs, military vehicles, limousines, and high-ranking government officials visiting his home, in addition to reports of potential multi-million-dollar deals. However, Meyer didn't sell out to any of these entities, even when threatened, instead insisting that his technology should belong to everyone. If Stephen Meyer was shocked by his twin brother's collapse and death, he was equally amazed at the Belgians' response the next day. "I told them that Stan had died, and they never said a word," he recalled. Absolutely nothing. No condolences, no questions. To this day, researchers continue to be intrigued by the 2 Belgian investors who dined with Meyer moments before his death. Had they been the ones who poisoned him?
Right now we have the entrenched energy monopolies and cartels. You know, we have OPEC and we have the 7 sister oil companies that control all the oil and energy. But what people have to understand is that the people who run the energy business in this world, which is the biggest business on the planet, turning over $4 to $5 trillion a year, it's bigger than guns and drugs, it's bigger than defense. They control the newspapers, they control the governments. But these companies are so big that they regulate the government, which regulates them.
It's not free. Nothing is free. But cheap and efficient energy exchange is a viable concept.
Now I say that everything in this universe is free energy. It's been dreamed of for hundreds of years that somewhere, someplace, as Tesla said, man will hook his machinery to the very wheelwork which drives the universe itself.
The history of science is the history of the suppression of great inventions. A few classic stories. Nikola Tesla.
Nikola Tesla is regarded as the founding father of free energy. His astounding developments in the generation of alternating electrical current are still being used today. His most notorious project involved the transmission of wireless electricity into the atmosphere, which allowed for unlimited power to be freely accessed by everyone. When his financial backer, J.P. Morgan, realized that this power system could not be metered, all funding was immediately withdrawn. Tesla's electrical broadcast towers were dismantled, and through Morgan's many close connections with the media and government, Tesla's career was destroyed. In 1977, Bruce De Palma unveiled the first prototype of the N machine, an electrical generator which uses rotating magnets to generate up to 5 times more power than it takes to drive it.
I know about the fact that the Japanese government and the Indian government have ongoing projects to produce N machines for domestic power. My partner is Paramahamsa Tiwari, who is the director of the Nuclear Power Corporation of India, which operates all the nuclear plants in India.
In late 70s, I learned from Bruce De Palma that he had carried out certain crucial experiments by rotating electromagnets.
Tiwari tested a prototype based on De Palma's N machine under laboratory conditions. The results were deemed too impressive, causing disbelief and suspicion among conservative government officials and the power consortiums that backed the project. Tiwari was forced to abandon the project completely.
It's a major breakthrough that will no doubt make motorists happy, and as Ralph Robinson explains, the Pentagon is also showing lots of interest in this project.
U.S. inventor Stan Myers released his water-powered car engine in 1988.
The Pentagon flew a lieutenant colonel in last week to look at Myers' invention. There's talk of possibly using it in the Star Wars defense program and to run Army tanks.
Myers found it virtually impossible to secure financial backing after certain Pentagon officials paid him a visit. A number of similar inventions were developed and tested all around the world.
My best friend was killed over this matter. There's a chap here, about 10 minutes away from here, driving. He has been running his car on water since 1986, with the government's permission, provided that he keeps his mouth shut. And with regular intervals, using his own words, they keep warning him to keep his mouth shut. One of our colleagues who have been running car on the water for the 10-year period now, he reckons that it's 26 times more powerful than petrol.
If you invent a better mousetrap, the world may beat a path to your door. If you invent a free energy machine, there'll be a path beat to your door, but you don't want those people there.
One of the pivotal people that I encountered early in my career was Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut.
Edgar J. Mitchell, an Apollo mission astronaut, founded the Noetics Institute in Southern California. The Institute's charter was supposedly to develop alternative energy systems by attracting inventors from all over the country. Mitchell became extremely interested in De Palma's N machine. He made De Palma a paltry offer to buy out the invention, which De Palma naturally refused.
He said to me that if I ever tried anything on my own in California, I would get my head blown off. So I was scared to death. The CIA operates through various very innocent-looking fronts to find out what people are thinking and what they're inventing. Now, what's more innocent than a benign institute founded on transcendental principles to help New Age inventors bring free energy into the world?
And that situation still exists in the United States today, where a person that really understands what's going on just can't get their idea out because the alternative science and medical fields have been co-opted by the intelligence services.
And he converted this little engine to run on water. This is many, many years ago. And he used it for several years. And somehow the news got out, and one day he got visitors, and he was told to dump the engine or else. 3 weeks later, the man was dead. And the coroner's finding was that he fell off the back of a train. He was drunk. Now, it happened that he didn't drink.
Even Dr. Townsend T. Brown, the electrogravitic research scientist, has on his 16-millimeter film of his lab test, which we've got here, he has guys with the black suits and black hats come into the place. You can see where the legends come from. I mean, these guys come in and they look like, bad Bart to black man. I mean, it's classic, and these things do happen.
There is no progressive science in a world where every scientific idea is evaluated for its military potential.
Power, our energy, and control of energy equals power in the new world order that is emerging. If you control the energy, the way we get around, the way we get electricity, the way we have our TVs and video cameras and stuff, if you do the control of the energy, then you've got control of the people.